Question time, listeners. Have you ever found yourself more invested in a conversation that exists on a screen than in the one happening right in front of you? More attached to who someone could be than who they actually are? I mean, we don't talk about that honestly very often because it's easier to call or maybe label it as love or connection or just being social. But I believe, listeners, sometimes underneath all of it, what we are really doing is escaping loneliness, escaping the discomfort of reality, and then building a fantasy that feels a whole lot safer. So, today we are going somewhere very real. Stay with me because this is going to be a very honest conversation. Welcome back, listeners, to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I am Sana, your host, and as you all know, this is the part of the Healthy Mind by Vic Network, a space where we have honest, raw conversations about what it actually takes to live well from the inside out. And listeners, today I'm joined by someone whose work actually sits at this intersection of healing, storytelling, and human soul. Introducing Catherine Crestani. She is a leadership coach, intuitive healer, author, and the founder of Willow Healing. And a novel, My Virtual Obsession. It's far more than a story, it is a mirror. And today, Catherine and I are exploring something that lives quietly in a lot of us, the way loneliness can pull us toward fantasy, toward obsession, toward choosing what could be over what is, and what it takes to find your way back to the real life. So, listeners, let's get started. And Catherine, welcome to Healthy Man, Healthy Life. I'm really, really glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to dive into this discussion because it can make people a little bit uncomfortable, but that's okay too.
It is okay. It is okay. That's how life is. It's not always easy, or, yeah, we say it's not always a bed of roses. But then, Catherine, before we get into the deeper layers of all of this, let's talk about your journey because you have openly, talked about burnout, then awakening, choosing yourself over and over again. When when did you first notice or maybe realize that you were someone who could hold a really uncomfortable truth and then write about it honestly rather than just look away?
I feel it's because I always had difficulty keeping friends. It sounds really weird, but through my life, I would make really good friends and then I would feel betrayed or I would feel like they would just kind of run away from me. And I couldn't figure out why. And when it came down to it, it's because I was reflecting to them parts of themselves that they didn't want to see. Because I'm not one for small talk. I'll just cut to the chase. And some of my good friends now, we actually joke that we can talk about things that we wouldn't talk about with other friends straight away. We don't even mask it or hide it. But it's when you put on these different personas and identities and show up. And when I see through that, because that's one of my gifts, that people feel really uncomfortable because I'm seeing them for who they really are with all the shields and the masks in place that we do to protect ourselves. And so this is where it kind of came to a point, and I was working with a coach for a little while, and he's like, leaders actually trigger people into doing something or to running away because this is what a true leader does. They're they can be seen as the victim or not the victim, they can be as the hero or as the villain, but they find it really hard to be accepted for who they are. And so when I started realizing that actually I'm just going to speak my truth because, why not? People can just accept me for how I am and take me
Mhm.
authentically, or they can run away from that. So that's where I started putting these words into what I speak, into how I share, and actually linking it into things that happen in my life because when you have lived experience that allows you to assist people through it as well and have a different level of compassion and empathy compared to just, having some idea what it might be like.
Hmm. Makes sense. Makes sense, Catherine. I mean, if I my views on, not views, I mean, my observations and experiences on loneliness. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, the human nature that we cannot just simply, it's not possible to simply just, tag it as black or white. There's a lot of gray, a lot of nuance in there. I mean, there are moments or, stages in your life when you just kind of crave for being alone for maybe just few minutes, 5 minutes in there, because you have too much going on in your life. But then there are moments when you actually crave for, being in presence of maybe your family or your loved ones, your friends. You kind of start seeing other people and kind of start judging yourself that, okay, I'm lonely, maybe, something is wrong with me. That's why I'm lonely. And then, coupled with the today's day and age, what all is happening, the virtual companions and all that, AI stuff. It's kind of, I think there are a lot of nuances related to the implications attached in here. How we project the challenge of, being or feeling that loneliness. So talking about your book, Catherine, My Virtual Obsession, it is described as romantic thriller, but then you have been very clear. It's actually something much deeper. It's about how loneliness can cause us to choose potential and obsession over reality. And I think what I shared probably could be, kind of connecting with this. You know, what is it about loneliness that I mean, that, makes fantasy feel not just appealing, but then generally more real than the reality?
Well, because our our natural human state craves connection, right? We're not meant to be alone, and I think we all experience this, through lockdowns and everything like that. We were craving that connection. We needed to be connected in some way, whether it was on the phone, over the internet, however it was. So our natural state as humans is to be connected around other people. We're not animals, we're not. We do better around other people. At the same time, when we have that loneliness, makes us reflect on our vulnerabilities. And that's why it's so uncomfortable for people, because when we're feeling alone, we have to face ourselves and we have to actually embrace that relationship that we have with ourselves. And if you haven't worked on loving yourself completely, and I'm not talking about romantic love, I'm talking about unconditional love, which is loving the darkness in you, loving the lightness in you, loving, the fact that you might be a little bit overweight, however that looks in your life, loving every aspect of you can make people feel really uncomfortable. So instead of facing our mirror and facing our own vulnerabilities, we try and escape into a reality of what things should be or what things could be. And even I've had clients and people I speak to, and they will stay in a relationship or they'll stay in a circumstance because they're fearful of being lonely and facing themselves. Or they go into this reality and fantasy, which is very similar to the book of, oh no, this is what my life should look like and this is how I imagine it should be. So I'm going to have, XYZ happen. So this is where all these kind of things intertwine. And when you really break down, okay, why am I stepping into this fantasy? It can be easier. It can be easier holding on to the idea of what your marriage should look like when your relationship's breaking down. It can be easier to hold on to a relationship and rather than the idea of what are you going to do on a Saturday night when you're all alone, you don't want to watch a movie by yourself. All these sorts of things keep us in this fantasy and why we want to go there. Even me recently, it wasn't loneliness, but when I released my book, all these marketing scams came for me. And I'm not going to lie, some of them are really tempting because it was what we wanted on a plate. It's what I wanted. I was like, here's XYZ. This is exactly what I want. But in reality, no, that person can't guarantee me book sales. That person can't guarantee me all of those things that they were promising. So sometimes that fantasy and having everything you want, there's nothing to say you can't have that, but you still have to anchor yourself in steps that an action that you need to take to get there. And sometimes if things are getting you from A to Z without going in the middle, that is where we can get trapped into a fantasy or a reality that doesn't exist, which is exactly what happens in the book.
Interesting. That is interesting. And do you think, Catherine, that people know on some level that they are living in a fantasy, or does the mind do a really good job of convincing them that it's real?
I feel it can be either way. It depends. And it's actually really interesting because I work a lot with chakras, which are the energy centers in the body. And if you have an imbalanced crown chakra, it can actually lead to you living in fantasy and realities that aren't actually happening. And I know we've all met that person where we just think, are they delusional? Like that is not what happened, or that is not what's happening right now in front of our face. And sometimes it can be that their nervous system gets into such a state, it's easier to stay in the fantasy rather than face what's happening in reality. And sometimes our brain needs to do that to keep us out of the trauma, to keep us out of the loop, to keep us in survival, so that this is why it can kind of play out that way as well. But then we have other people who sometimes it's just they know what's going on, but they just stick their head in the sand like an ostrich and they don't want to know what's going on because it can be hard. And I'm not going to lie, it was difficult living my first marriage. I knew in my heart it's what I had to do, but it was still difficult because I had to face, what's next? I don't know. But at the same time, that can be exciting in itself, and I've had other clients and it's like, oh, but it's just easier. It's like, but is it easier? Because, the thing is, energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred. So when you think about what's keeping you in these relationships that don't necessarily work, or when you think about situations that can even be a job or a career, if you don't start to look for something different or finish where you're at so you can move on, how is the universe going to allow you an opportunity? Even I've had clients who are stuck in the reality, not in they know the reality, but they still have this dream of what the relationship could look like. But when you bring them back to actually, but that's not happening, and we can only change ourselves. We can't change the other person, right? So when we come back to that and circle back, it's like, okay, well, what can I actually do in this moment? I can only be courageous and honor myself rather than trying to change everything else around me. And it takes courage to step out of those situations. And that's why I feel people get stuck in the reality, in the false reality or in the fantasy, because it's just easier. It's easier than taking those courageous steps to step out of it because you're stepping into the unknown. And our brain doesn't like that. Our ego doesn't like the unknown. Our ego likes to keep us safe and have a structure and that sort of thing. But it takes courage to step out into a new way of being and a new way of life.
Absolutely makes sense. And I also feel, Catherine, just to add on to it, I think it's kind of this safety gear that our mind or maybe our nervous system, it kind of, wears. Either, if we have, let's say, childhood traumatic experiences, or maybe, people, I mean, let's say I'm seeing that, my friends or my classmates, they don't like me, or they just keep on taunting me because I don't fit the usual way of appearance, and they're overweight, or, maybe mm, you look nerdy, those kind of taunts. You start to kind of get into a very different zone because, deep down you just want to feel safe in there. Or maybe, when we are going through grief or loss, we kind of feel that threatening within us. So maybe that's how our mind or our nervous system kind of wears that protective gear, just to feel safe, feel good.
Yeah, I agree 100% because sometimes we do what we need to do to get through the situation, right? Like, but as you get older, you don't have to stay in those situations anymore. It's different when you're a child. And it's not to take away from that because being bullied and, being made fun of and all those things, it's terrible and it does play on your mind. And then it can also lead to you, there's that saying that we accept the love we think we deserve. Because if you think that, if you had someone that you loved in your life and they always leaves you all the time, then especially as a child, then you think that that's the norm. So this is what you grow up believing and accepting as yourself. At the same time, you can stop that and say, no, I'm going to be the cycle breaker and I'm going to put a stop to that right now. And I'm not going to allow that to keep playing out in my life. And I think it was Keanu Reeves said, if you're not comfortable sitting with yourself, then how can you be comfortable with anybody else? So if you're like escaping facing yourself and putting yourself in relationships and putting these masks on, you're never going to have successful relationship where you feel like you can truly be yourself because you've masked yourself from the beginning. And even when I found my husband now, I just laid it all on the table like he did. Like, and there's still moments where I'm like, actually, I'm not going to talk to you about that because I don't want to. I'm going to go talk to someone else because I know you're not going to understand it or you're not going to get it. And that's okay too, because we're allowed to have multiple people in our lives we go to. But at the same time, I'm happy being on my own. I am happy having that moment where there's quiet in the house and I can just go do wherever I like and have that moment. But I also like having the balance of having my family around. So this is where it comes down to who are you really and what do you want to accept? How do you value yourself? And what are the values you have in your life that you want to see echoed out into multiple facets and multiple areas rather than accepting things that maybe aren't necessarily in line with who you want to be?
Mm, mm. Yeah, I do understand that question. Yeah, I do. And before we wrap up, Catherine, let's say for someone who recognizes themselves in this, maybe they are in a situation right now where they know honestly they are more attached to a version of someone, maybe a version of life than to what's actually there. What does coming back to reality actually look and feel like, like the small daily return to what's real?
I feel it's actually start to get honest with yourself. Like look in the mirror and, it's such a simple practice. Tell yourself, like look in your eye, look in the mirror and tell yourself, I love you. And if that feels uncomfortable, why? And start to ask these questions and go through, actually, what do I want underneath all of this? What do I desire? Who am I underneath all of this? And just because you've got yourself in a situation that might not feel authentic in your life doesn't mean you can't change. And by starting and being really honest with yourself and looking in the mirror, you can start to build back that trust with yourself because that's often what happens and start to commit to yourself. So if you say to yourself, I'm going to get up and go to the gym, get up and go to the gym. If you say, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go for a walk or I'm going to read that book, honor that and do that because the more you make promises to yourself and break it, that is when we start to step into this fantasy because we're not honoring who we are and we're not trusting ourselves. So instead, we'll make excuses. We'll just keep allowing that to filter out into our life. So really coming back to yourself and going, what do I really want in all of this can be such a powerful thing. And I know Clive, one of the main characters in my book, that's what he does. He's like, actually, what do I want? This situation has made me reflect on all the things I don't want. Actually, I don't even know if I want to keep working, doing what I'm doing, or, living where I'm living. And that's okay too. This is why we often go through midlife crises, but really it's coming back to what do I truly want in this life?
It's really powerful, Catherine. Really powerful. And of course, for all of our listeners, where they can find your book, and if they would also like to connect with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for the invitation, Sonia. So my book is on Amazon, Kobo, most of your favorite e-reader platforms. If you want to buy it directly from me, you can go to my website, which is willowhealing.org/my-virtual-obsession. If you want to find more about me, you can just go to willowhealing.org. And I hang out a lot on Instagram. So my handle is willowhealing and then SH. And yeah, if you want to come explore, I have a podcast as well, which is called Willow Healing Matters, where we dive into all sorts of things, physical, spiritual, all the fun things in life. You're welcome to come and jump on and check that out as well. And if you're just curious or you just want something, please do reach out to me. I am very approachable. I don't just sound this friendly. I am like this friendly in real life too. But, and I do have a sense of humor because sometimes, even in the most serious moments in life, we still need to find a reason to laugh. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's so well said, Catherine. Yes, yes, definitely. We do need that a lot. And yes, listeners, I'll have all the links mentioned in the show notes. So, yes, check out Catherine's book, Virtual Obsession, and also check out Willow Healing and check out our podcast as well. And to make that all easier for you, I'll have all the links mentioned in the show notes. So, find them attached along with this episode on whichever platform you are tuning into your Healthy Mind, Healthy Life podcast right now. And Catherine, thank you. Thank you so much for this meaningful conversation, honest, healing in all the right ways. And I really appreciate, for the work that you're doing, and especially keeping loneliness at the center, because honestly, in today's day and age, it's becoming much more relevant to talk about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you for having me and letting me share this with you.
And to all the listeners, thank you so much, for being such a wonderful part of the Healthy Mind, Healthy Life community. And if something in today's conversation landed somewhere quiet inside you, sit with it. You don't need to rush past it or fix it. Just let it be there. Because sometimes the most healing thing we can do is stop running from what's real and start getting curious about it instead. Until next time, this is Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.